Well, last June's major flood swamped Bloomington. One man drowned, businesses were damaged, and some residents were forced to evacuate their homes. A year later, property owners along Clear Creek are worried flash floods are becoming more frequent and powerful. Mitch Legan reports.
The water goes down Rogers Street and it eventually goes that way back into Clear Creek.
Memories of last year's flash flood are still fresh for Lonnie Baker. He gets anxious every time there are reports about an incoming storm.
I look at the size of the storms. You know, is this the night it's going to flood? Yeah, you get those in the back of your head.
Last June, Baker watched as Clear Creek flooded his backyard. The water kept rising and eventually poured into his house. Baker had gotten water in his garage before, but nothing like what happened last year.
That last flood, the water was this high.
Gotcha.
I barely could exit my home.
Baker's one of many property owners who lives along Clear Creek. Flash floods have always been an issue, but he and others are worried they're becoming more frequent.
I don't know if I can do it anymore. I've had two major floods, and the flood of 19 and the flood of 21. And it's like starting over, you know.
We just heard thunder.
Yeah, ironic.
Last year's flood was a true flash flood. An estimated 6 to 8 inches of rain poured down in a matter of hours. Residents along the creek acknowledge it was an anomaly, but they're concerned they might be noticing a pattern.
They come and they go in about 20 minutes. So you'll see this really high water and you'll literally see waves as it rolls out over the bridge on that road.
Baker, Weichel Cassidy, and others believe the combination of climate change and development in Bloomington will make severe flash floods more common. Miles of culverts actually guide a river from the IU campus under the city of Bloomington over to First and Walnut Streets, where Clear Creek emerges. Those culverts also help carry the city's stormwater.
Many of these sections we believe are over 100 years old, undersized. We want to try to get them out from under buildings, obviously, and have done that for the most part. There are some locations that are still under buildings, but they're much beefier, I will call it.
When the culvert project's complete, the city says they'll have twice the stormwater capacity as the old ones. And that's what concerns residents along Clear Creek. Flooding's already an issue, and the city will be adding more water. Heavy rain events are becoming more common in Indiana and the Midwest, and that increases the chance for a flash flood. According to a city report from 2020, Bloomington has seen a 25% increase in heavy rain in the last 40 years.
What we tend to see here over the last few years is a lot of more intense short rainfall events. It's hard to really get a good handle on how much things are changing, but we do believe that most experts agree that there is something that's changing.
That same city report says heavy rain events will become more common in Bloomington. It also adds that it's important to take downstream communities into consideration when making water decisions.
There's not enough capacity in Clear Creek, and to keep adding to it with buildings, and that's got to happen, you know. Development's got to go on, but they got to consider what it's doing to the neighbors down here.
Fleeg, the city engineer, says they have spoken with some residents downstream about the potential for increased flooding.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't ensure there won't be flooding. There have been changes in rain patterns and intensities. We are just seeing bigger rain events these days. We are looking at the downstream section where it opens up, potentially some repairs in that location. But we will be, the modeling helps us to look at what's going to eventually end up downstream and what repairs we need to make down there.
Knipe says the Department of Natural Resources plans to look at the Clear Creek floodplain in the near future. The DNR got some money from the Federal Emergency Management Agency for projects in Monroe County.
If for whatever reason this area gets mapped differently, that's a discussion we'll have to have with the city to see what there is to try to mitigate those issues.
The impacts of development and climate change will take years to be seen. For residents along the creek, leaving the future in the hands of Mother Nature is unnerving, but nothing new.
No, you can't control the climate, you can't control the rain, but surely they need to determine if something could be done to that creek bed.
For Indiana News Desk, I'm Mitch Legan.
We're joined by Mitch to talk more on how flooding is impacting the people along Clear Creek. Mitch, you've been talking to residents over a year on this.
Yep.
So when did the culvert work begin?
So you might remember this is an extension of the Big Dig. It happened back in 2000. The city tore up parts of Kirkwood and Dunn to try to prevent flooding downtown. But that didn't take care of the issue. They've continued with projects since then, and the current project that they're working on should be done around August. Then they'll move north in the city to Indiana and Dunn, work on the culverts there. And once that's done, the underground river will be totally encapsulated. But that doesn't finish everything. There's still going to be some other culverts that they need to work on, so this will continue.
Is there any development that the people there are worried about?
Yes, in talking with them, they kept bringing up the removal of Weimer Lake, or the draining, the removal of the dam. That was back in 2018, and they believe that removing that dam there has led to more flooding downstream. I spoke with the city engineer in charge of the project and IU professor Todd Royer, who studies hydrology, and both agreed that that decision really wouldn't make that much of an impact downstream because, as Royer said, the lake just wasn't that big, and it was initially developed for drinking water as opposed to flood control. So whenever it get a ton of rain, that water would just kind of end up in the creek anyway. But he said that those concerns about climate change, about development, those are legit because if we're getting heavier, more rain events, and the city's sending more rain down the river, more water down the river, well, guess what? That's going to increase the chance for bigger or more frequent flooding.
Now, how about the DNR? So you talked to them. What role do they play in all this?
Yeah, so they're going to be taking a look. They didn't give too much of specifics as to what they'll be doing down here, but they're going to look at the floodplain, maybe make some changes to maps if necessary. One of the areas that I am personally interested in is the Pinewood Drive area of Bloomington. It's right next to the creek. It experiences pretty consistent flooding, and yet it's not in the floodplain. The floodplain just goes directly around it. It kind of confuses me. I haven't gotten any answers. So I'm interested to see what happens there. And they said they're just starting these projects, and we'll hopefully get some new information in the next 2 to 3 years.
All right, Mitch, thanks so much for your reporting on this. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe.